to today's event with Mr. Joaquin Zihuatanejo. Before we get into the formal part of this event, I would like to invite up Mr. Sam Ortiz, who's the student body president, for a quick announcement.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming out to the event today. Just wanted to let you know of another event that ASU is putting on with Project Voice. So a little bit about Project Voice, which stands for Vocal Outreach into Creative Expression. It is an international movement that celebrates and inspires youth self-expression through spoken word poetry. Conceived in 2004, Project Voice encourages young people to engage with the world around them and use spoken word poetry as an instrument through which they can explore and better understand their culture, their society, and ultimately themselves. Project Voice brings together performance, writing, and a supportive environment to inspire youth to recognize that their views are significant, valid, and necessary. So this event will be held here in the Saltaire Room February 3rd at 6 p.m. Students can pick up 2 free tickets just at the office, at the ASU office, room 234. So if you like what you hear today, and I can assure you that you most definitely will like what you hear and want to hear some more, we invite you to come to this event and grab your free tickets. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Sam. So a little quick rundown of today's event. We're going to have a formal introduction here in just a second, and then Mr. Zihuatanejo will be conducting his performance. Afterwards, we will be doing a question and answer, so any questions you might have for Mr. Zihuatanejo, he'd be more than willing to answer for you. But without further ado, I want to welcome up Fatima Ahmed for the formal introduction.
Good afternoon. How y'all doing? Are y'all excited? I have the honor and privilege of introducing Joaquin Zihuatanejo. He is a poet, a spoken word artist, and an award-winning teacher. Born and raised in the barrio of East Dallas, in his work, Joaquin strives to capture the duality of the Chicano culture. Sometimes brutal, but always honest, his work depicts the essence of the barrio life, writings about a youth that existed somewhere between the streets of the barrio and the dreams wanderings of a boy who found refuge in a world of stories and poems. Joaquin has been called by critics one of the most dynamic and passionate performance poets in the country, melding equal parts of comedy, poetry, and dramatic monologue into a crowd-pleasing display of verbal fireworks. Always thrilling. Joaquin's hilariously manic presentation is full of compassion and nuance, never sacrificing substance for style, leading many to call him Poetry Slam's answer to John Leguizamo. A National Poetry Slam finalist, Grand Slam spoken word champion, and HBO's deaf poet, Joaquin has performed his poetry at universities, conferences, and poetry slams all over the United States, Canada, Mexico, and Europe. In 2005, Joaquin was featured on season 5 of Russell Simmons Presents Deaf Poetry for HBO. Joaquin recently won the 2008 Individual World Poetry Slam Championship, besting 77 poets representing cities all over North America, France, and Australia. Without further ado, please welcome Joaquin Zihuatanejo.
They warned me not to turn on the mic until I passed the speakers or it would hurt everyone's ears. So thank you for being here. University of Utah, thank you for having me. My name is Joaquin Zihuatanejo, and I'm a writer and a poet and a teacher from a faraway place called Dallas, Texas. But please don't hold the fact that I'm a Texan against me. I think before I share my first poem, I'll do this little kind of this little story poem to begin, because a lot of times people often ask me, how did you become a poet? How does that happen? Started with a yard man, mi abuelo. My grandfather was a yard man. That means he would mow the front and backyards of people's houses for 10, 12, 14, whatever amount of dollars they were willing to pay him to do so. My grandfather looked for work in the city of Dallas, but there wasn't a lot of work to be found in such a big metropolis for someone who doesn't speak very good English. So he would journey out of Dallas into these far-off foreign suburbs, places like Garland, Texas, and Mesquite, Texas, and Plano, Texas, and he would look for work out there. My grandfather would leave before the sun would come up. He would come home long after the sun had gone down. I'm from a place called Texas. The sun is up a lot. So my grandfather's work days were 10, 12, 14, 15 hours long. He was mystified by the people who lived in these suburbs. They mystified my grandfather and the things that they would do. Like, for instance, he would always talk about the fact that they would take things they no longer wanted and put them out on the curb for anyone to have. He couldn't believe that people would do that. He never used the word basura, trash. He always used the word tresero, treasure. So he was also a treasure hunter as well, my grandfather. Televisions with broken antennas, young people, college students. We used to have these things called antennas on TVs, look like this. And when they would break, people would get frustrated, put it out on the curb, and my grandfather would take that frustration, put it in the back of his truck, and bring it home to the casa, in our barrio in East Dallas, and he would put a little duct tape, a little aluminum foil, someone holding it in just the right way. That was usually me. A lot of hours of my childhood were like this, Right there, mijo, we got the cowboy game, don't move, Bicycles with rusty chains and flat tires, forget about it. A little WD-40, a little bit of air. Ride, mijo, like the wind, go. And I did, I rode like the wind. But he was also mystified by the fact that they had things that we didn't have. Like out in these neighborhoods, they had these things which sadly, in some parts of Dallas, we still don't have. They had recycling bins. And when those recycling bins would fill up with newspaper and magazines and books, sometimes, rarely, sometimes though, the people who lived in those neighborhoods would take entire boxes of books that they no longer wanted and put them out on the curb for anyone to have. And that was my grandfather's most sought-after treasure. He would take these boxes of books, put them in the back of his truck, and bring them back to our little house. And he stocked them on this little two-tier shelf in the sala that kind of leaned to one side, this shelf, because he found it on the side of the road. And even though, I'm a Latino and I come from a very big family, my mother has, 4 sisters and 5 brothers, and they all have tons of kids. You know how we are, Latinos. And even though there's a lot of us at any given time living in my grandfather's house, my mother, who was a single mother, and I, we were one of the mainstays. And so even though there was a lot of us coming in and out of that one house, only one person in that entire family, in that entire house, had to read every single one of those books on that shelf. And that one person was me. My grandfather made me read them out loud in English to him. This is how his day would work. He would leave before the sun would come up. He would work all day long, come home long after dark. He would have his comida, his dinner. He would kiss his wife, my beautiful abuelita, Juanita. He would rest a bit, take a shower. And then about 9 o'clock or so, he would come into the living room, into the sala, and I'd have to read to him for about an hour or two, however long he wanted. And my grandfather could understand English. He just sort of chose not to speak it. I think he was a little embarrassed of his rather thick Spanish accent. So this is the way it worked with me and my grandfather as a child. I had to read these poems in these books, or these short stories in these books, or these novels out loud in English to my grandfather. And then my grandfather would critique me in Spanish. If you don't know what critique means, it means yell at you. And if you've never been critiqued in Spanish, ay, Dios mío, it hurts your soul, Because sometimes I would just be going through the motions, I'd just be reading the poem like this to get to the end of the poem so I can do what I want to do. And when I would do that, he would lean into me and he would say things to me like, mijo, if you don't lean into the words, how can I lean into your voice? If you don't bring it to life with your voice, how can I bring it to life in my mind? So he was also my first teacher, I remember once when I was very young, younger than every single person in this room, I was about 9 years old, I actually mustered the courage to challenge my grandfather. I looked him right in the eyes and I said to him, "Abuelo, why do you make me read all these stupid books?" And I'll never forget what he said to me. I remember it like it was yesterday. He said to me, "Mijo, this barrio, this neighborhood, is surrounded on all sides by gangs and crime and poverty and violence. But when you're inside the poem, when you're inside the book, you are safe, and none of that can hurt you." And with those words, the spell was broken. And with those words, a life was saved, mine. The only reason that I was able to not graduate from high school, would be the first person in my family to graduate from high school with this thing in Texas called Advanced Placement Honors. The only reason I was the first person in my family to get an academic scholarship, the only reason I was the first person in my family to graduate from university, the only reason I was the first person in my family to be a teacher, to be a published writer, to be an author and a poet, and to travel to countries and states, the only reason any of this has happened to me is because mi abuelo, my grandfather, when I was a skinny punk kid, put a book in my hand and challenged me to be more than I ever thought I could be. The reason that I'm here with you all today, you, and I thank you so much for having me, is because of my grandfather. So to honor him, I'll start with a poem about my grandfather. And really, this is where I learned most of what I learned as a kid. He had this little 10-foot by 12-foot plot of dirt beside our home, which was his garden. And all that college stuff was kind of extra, the university stuff. Everything I really learned, that I needed, I sort of got out of that garden, just kneeling beside him and listening to him. So this is para mi abuelo. This is for my grandfather. This is called Abuelo's Garden. It's the first one today. And by the way, you're supposed to start a poetry recitation with an invocation to the muse. That's how the ancients used to do it, So this is my invocation to the muse, my first muse, my last muse, my every muse. Because when my mother could not and my father would not raise me, well, there was my grandfather who stepped in and did everything. So this is for him. There's a little bit of Spanish at the beginning and end. If you don't understand Spanish, just feel it, Bendito, bendito, bendito sea Dios. Los ángeles cantan y alaban a Dios. Memories of my grandfather's garden come back to me differently than other child of the hood memories. Memories of my grandfather's garden come back to me in well-watered voices and deep chest hymns that begin as a gurgle deep in the belly and rise to the throat slowly. I remember little of the day my friends jumped me in. I remember fist flailing and afterwards those deep, fleshy embraces only Latinos know how to give. But grandfather's garden comes back to me with aromas, with tastes, with corridos sung to the sun and novenas sung to the moon, thanking both sides of life, the light and the dark, for their bountiful harvest. Ay, Dios mío. All those nights we knelt together in brown earth, it was always about harmony, about balance, heed and tone deeply, thanking the life-giving soil for its gift. And I'd follow suit, carefully pulling up cilantro, manzanilla, hierba al manso, always making sure metal spade never touches fragile roots. Sweet, ancient abuelito. How could I be anything but a poet after those moments we shared? Don't you see? In my grandfather's garden, chiles grew. In my grandfather's garden, children grew. In my grandfather's garden, poems rose from the earth like the twisted arms of La Llorona, desperately reaching out for her missing children. In my grandfather's garden, all of these things would rise slowly because beautiful things take time to bloom. In my grandfather's garden, all of these things would rise slowly like well-watered voices, like deep chest hymns that begin as a gurgle, deep in the belly, and rise to the throat, slowly singing, always singing. Bendito, bendito, bendito sea Dios. Los ángeles cantan y alaban a Dios. Los ángeles cantan y alaban a Dios. The first one. Thank you. We're on our way now. So thrilled, absolutely so thrilled to be asked by U of U to be here as part of this week that is, first and foremost for me, sort of a celebration of the dream of one of my heroes, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., but also a week that sort of where we're asking you, the students and faculty and community, to think about the life of the underrepresented youth and what it is to be that underrepresented youth in a country that's as glorious at some moments and as horrifying at some moments as the United States of America, the country we all call home. So I thank you and I commend you for being here and for being a part of the week's events that led up to this and to be thinking about it and to keep it in your hearts and on your minds. I will say this before I go into the next poem. I've been lucky enough to speak at these things called TED conferences. I'm kind of a TED head. So if you look me up out there, you'll find some of my TED Talks. And you're supposed to end every TED Talk the same way. You're supposed to end by saying, I have an idea worth spreading, and then this big concluding thought. So I'll kind of open today with my TED conclusion. And here it is. I have an idea worth spreading. And my idea that I think we should spread is this. I think every single one of you in this room who can hear me, I think all of you should be a poet. And I know what you're thinking, but Joaquin, I'm studying to be a doctor. That's fine. You can be a doctor and a poet. You can be both. William Carlos Williams did it for years. If he was both, then you can be both. And the reason I challenge you to be a poet is because it's one of those things that sort of connects us to our humanity every time we experience it. Whether we're reading it or writing it or sharing it with someone. So I challenge you to be a part of this thing that is poetry. And if I'm going to challenge you to be a part of this thing that is poetry, I'm going to give you some advice, one writer to another. So here's my advice for you today, and that is this. And it comes from a very famous poet named Claribel Alegría. I love her last name. Her last name, Alegría, means joy. But anyway, Claribel Alegría, who comes to us from Nicaragua by way of Guatemala, she says this to aspiring young poets. She says, always keep your seed book with you. And that's the advice I have for you today. Always keep your seed book with you. I don't use the word journal or iPhone. Just whatever that thing is that you're documenting your life in, whether it's a notepad or a bar napkin or whatever, keep it with you because you never know when a poem's going to accost you, is going to find you, is going to shake you. Like the other day, when I was at the mall. Oh, hell yeah. Have you ever been there, the mall? Have you been to that place? Good night, man. It's like a whole different world in that place. We have them everywhere in Texas. Everywhere in Texas there are malls. It's like the mall capital of the world, I think. I was in the mall with my youngest daughter a while back, and I was tying her shoe, kneeling down on one knee, tying her shoe. And I was speaking to her in Spanish, which I sometimes do. And a man behind me was walking down the corridor with his family, and he made a comment loud enough for me and my young daughter to hear about how disgusted he was that I was speaking Spanish in, this is what he said, his country. Now, back in the day, it would have been on, But I'm a college-educated man. I'm not going to jail for this guy. Ain't nobody got time for that. But I will go home, and I will write a poem about your sorry ass. I will, and it will last forever. So I went home, and I sort of went into my office, which my beautiful wife designed and added onto our house. It's all glass, looks out on trees. I love my wife. She's an amazing designer, and I was ready to slam my fingers down on the keyboard, and I did. I just slammed them down, and I typed up onto my Mac. The working title was, How Much I Hate the Man at the Mall. That was the working title. And then I looked over to the side, and there's this brick wall that's sort of the exterior of the wall that she built onto, and there's this one photo hanging on that brick wall. It's the only photo hanging in my office. It's mostly glass, and it's a photo of my grandfather, my abuelo. My grandfather was a pacifist. which means he was opposed to the idea of violence. My grandfather actually went one step further than that. He's the only person I've ever met in my life who was actually a pacifist, who was opposed to the idea of hate. I'll say that again. He was opposed to the idea of hate. You know, you read a newspaper and it's like someone killed, 20 people, and you're like, oh God, I hate that guy. We all say that because we're human. My grandfather wouldn't say that. He would say things like, I want to understand that person. I want to be able to connect with him and show him God's grace and show him the path. That's the kind of... So I knew if I wrote a poem about hate, that it would shame the man who taught me everything that I know about poetry. And I never want to create a work of art or write a poem that would shame my grandfather. So I deleted the title, decided to start again. And my goal, my hope was to write a poem to this man, for this man, to show him that words, much like people, we all come from all over the place, but we're all sort of connected. And that's what I wanted to share with him. And so I wrote this man this, and this poem is dedicated to the man that I insulted at the mall. This is called Speaking in Tongues. Siéntate, portate bien, ni metes papita mala cinta. Sit down and behave, my little one, while daddy ties your shoe. You see, these words are meant for my daughter and not for you. So as you roll your eyes and speak in a voice loud enough for her to hear, if they can't speak our language, they don't belong here. Know this. Your contempt for the language my grandfather prayed in is the least of my worries. It's the least of my fears. What you should have contempt for is how simple you are. Simple, which comes from the Spanish simple, derived from the Latin simplus, meaning stupid. Because you see, people living in adobe houses should not throw stones, because adobe is a word my people have been using a long time for home. Even the most American of words, like the Alamo, barbecue, burrito, they all come from my people. But even a fool could realize that just because you take something doesn't mean you plagiarize. Oh, by the way, plagiado, that's the Spanish word from which plagiarize derives. You see, we give them willingly. So when you attack my language, you attack your own. And that makes you a cannibal. From the Spanish caníbal, derived from the Latin cannibalis, and maybe you could grasp this. If you ever had a different tongue so enveloped with your own, you couldn't tell where hers ends and yours begins. You see, this is the way tongues were meant to be. This is the way we were meant to be unido, which is Spanish for united, which comes from the Latin unite, meaning inseparable. But yet, you still have the nerve to demand that I speak with your tongue? Don't you see? I already do. Your tongue is my grandfather eating un burrito con huevos y chorizo. Your tongue is he and she and we. Your tongue is everyone. Your tongue is a blending of all accents, all colors, all things. And if you listen closely to the hip-hop lyrics being sung by your son, you'll realize that your tongue is new variations on old themes like gospel, becoming blues, becoming rock, becoming rap. Your tongue is as black as Eminem and Elvis Presley's lyrics. Look. I saw a black woman carry a white child away from Katrina with my very own eyes. You can feel it in the spirits that pay with their lives. Lincoln and Douglas, Kennedy and King, they had everything in common. They all shared the same dream. But after all this, you still push me away. You still think I'm different from you. Just because I say zapato sometimes instead of shoe. And though the man in me thinks pendejo is the word in Spanish for you, the poet in me knows that this is not true, as much as we hate to admit it. You are me, and I am you. So I guess hermanos is the word for us in Spanish. And like all brothers, we sometimes don't get along. Sometimes we get what's right confused what's wrong, but we shouldn't be so simple that we choose not to see that you and I, that we are impenetrable, which comes from the Spanish impenetrable, derived from the Latin impenetrabalis, which means two, standing as one. Look, I have a brown daughter. You have a white son. Don't let language be a barrier between them. Let them dance a salsa or merengue together to the music of Justin Bieber. Let them eat arroz con pollo with a side of mac and cheese, please. Let them be a blending of all accents, all colors, all things. Let them be new variations on old themes. Let them be better than you and me. Maybe it's time we embrace our differences like they were our children and just let them be. Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm about to break one of my own rules. I'm the executive director for a group of youth poets in Dallas called Dallas Youth Poets that I take to this big national competition called Brave New Voices every year. And I don't allow my students to read off of phones. You shouldn't do it. And here I'm about to do it. Because I tried to pull it up on my iPad and it's erroring. So this next thing that I'm going to share with you is not a story or a poem. It's a Facebook status that I'm going to read to you, that I wrote the other day. I'm actually putting together a book of statuses that I've written over the last 3 years. And I think this fittingly fits in with what we're talking about this week. And there's a little bit of homework assignment attached to this status, this thing I'm going to share with you. And that homework is that there's a film out there in the world that you can find if you haven't already found it. And the name of that film is Fruitvale Station. And if you have not found it, if you have not seen it, I challenge you to find that film, to see that film, and maybe even afterwards write something about it. So I wrote this. I have been wanting to see the film Fruitvale Station for so long and just finished watching it with my wife. I cannot recall a time when I was at once filled with so much sadness and at the same time so much rage after watching a film as I am right now. I challenge you all to see this film. Ryan Coogler writes and directs with a depth that is so profound and poignant, and Michael B. Jordan is astonishing in his role as Oscar Grant III. Before I was a writer and a poet, even before I was a teacher, I was a young man going to college who at the same time worked at a litigation service, making copies for some of the biggest law firms in Dallas. It was a job to help put food on the table for me and my wife, Aida, to help us get through school. But I was appreciative, so I worked as hard as I could for them. And I was made the youngest assistant manager in the company's history. And one day, after leading a half-day Saturday shift, one of my team members offered a ride home to me and another employee. It's been so long, many years, that I've forgotten their names, but I think the young woman who offered me the ride was named Winnie. And I think the young man who was also offered a ride, and also a great employee, and always had a smile on his face, was named Troy. They were both African-American or black. I was Mexican-American or brown. So we got in Winnie's truck and left downtown Dallas laughing, acting a fool, and cutting up. Right as we pulled into Deep Ellum, just off downtown, the sirens and flashes glared behind us, and two white Dallas police officers pulled us over and stepped out of their vehicle. When I asked them why, they said we had a cracked windshield, which Winnie did. The crack was about 3 inches in length in the upper right-hand corner of the windshield. They asked Winnie to get out of the vehicle, put both hands on the side of the truck, and not move them 1 inch. They asked me and Troy to get out of the car and kneel on the sidewalk with our hands above our heads. They made us take our shirts off. They searched the truck and found my backpack in the bed of the truck. One of the officers grabbed my pager from my side, held it in front of my face, and asked me, "Are you an expletive drug dealer?" "Well, are you? Are you a drug dealer?" I snapped at him and said, "No." Troy whispered for me to calm down and not say anything. I looked over at him and I noticed that he was crying. He was truly terrified. The sight of him crying calmed me momentarily, and I knew at that moment I was responsible for his life and mine. One of the officers grabbed my backpack and held it to my face and said, "What's in this? Are you an expletive drug dealer?" "Well, are you?" I replied. "Ain't nothing in that bag but books." One of them reached into my back pocket, took out my wallet. He turned to his partner and said, "It's only got $40 in here." I think at that moment I realized they were looking to get paid. As one of the officers dumped the contents of my backpack on the street, the other stood right behind me. I whispered something under my breath about what cowards they were, and the officer behind me said, "What did you say?" Troy turned to me and said, "Shut up, Joaquin." I told the officer I didn't say anything. He had his hand on his gun the entire time. But at that moment, he pulled his weapon and placed the barrel of his gun to the back of my head and said, "That's what I thought." The other officer, who had just dumped my textbooks on the street, sifted through the contents of my backpack and motioned for his partner to head back to the squad car. They both walked slowly back to their cruiser. Then one of them yelled, "You get that windshield fixed soon." The other yelled, "You all have a nice day. Be safe." This is the first time I have written about this. We cannot allow young black and brown men to be hunted and preyed upon. Oscar Grant III deserved better. Troy deserved better. We all do. Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to share that with you. That's the first time I've voiced that to an audience ever. So thank you for listening to that. It's been very heavy so far. So Shakespeare taught us this thing that if you're going heavy, lighten it up a little bit, you know? So it's time for a little comic relief. But still inside the theme of what we're all here for. Oh, yeah. So here goes. I was traveling from one university to another university in Arkansas, had my seed book with me, as I always do, and another poem just sort of stumbled upon me and just sort of happened to me. Backtrack just a bit before this poem happened. I found myself, not long after this, flash forward, sorry, not long after this poem found me, I found myself down in the Rio Grande Valley, which I love. If you've never been in the Rio Grande Valley of Texas, that part of the border where the river touches both sides, it's really an amazing place to be because it's neither here nor there. It's like not Mexico and not the United States. It's just this amazing little part of our country. And I was down there in a place called Pharr, Texas, Pharr, and it's aptly named because it is far from everything. And my agent booked me to go down there and work with students. So the first thing I said to my agent on the phone was, "Oh, great, what university is it?" He's like, "Well, Joaquin, it's not a university." So I said, "Okay, cool, what high school is it?" And he goes, "Well, it's not a high school." And I said, "What middle school is it?" And he goes, "Well, not a middle school." And then I knew, oh my goodness, elementary school. They sent me down to the Rio Grande Valley to work with 600 fifth graders. And it was so amazing seeing the teachers walk these young Latinos, it was all Latinos, puros Latinos, walk them into this gymnasium as they were facing me. And they all sort of took a look at me and took a look at them and they just left. Like they went outside, I don't know, to smoke cigarettes or something, and left me with these 600 kids. And I was terrified, but it actually ended up going really, really well. And we did these sort of interactive things, and I was teaching and performing, and it was a great day. But at one point in the lecture, I was telling them that, that I want them to keep their seed book with them and write their stories, and that their lives are extraordinary. That their lives are extraordinary, and every single second of their life is worthy of being in a poem. And when I said this to them, this young man raised his hand. I found out later on that young man's name was Juan Carlos. The troublemakers are always named Juan Carlos, always. He said to me, so if every living second of our moment is worth being in a poem, then you're telling me you've written about every second of your life. And I was like, well, sort of. And he goes, so you've probably written a poem about going to the bathroom. Number 2. Okay, this was about 6 months after my Arkansas trip, and I looked this young man into the windows of his soul, and I said to him, are you asking me if I have ever written a poem about going to the bathroom, number 2? And he said, uh-huh. And I still had him in his locked tractor beams on his gaze, and I said to him, yes, I have. And I'd like to recite it for you all right now, you. And now back to Arkansas. I found myself several months before this in Arkansas traveling from one university to another. And for lack of a more poetic way of putting this, I had to go, okay? So That's how the poem begins. By the way, my beautiful Puerto Rican wife, who, by the way, hates poetry, thinks that this poem is the most beautiful thing I've ever written. This is called Hope 5 Miles. The last sign I remember reading before I pulled into the rest stop read, Hope 5 miles. I noticed a large black man enter the restroom just before me. A skinny white teenager entered just after me. There were just 3 stalls. And there we all sat, like the worst Benetton Colors of the World clothing advertisement ever created. I normally don't like stall talk, but I couldn't resist. I said, you know, King dreamed that someday little black boys and little white boys and little brown boys would all stand side by side, holding hands. Well, at least we're all, you know, sitting side by side. That's a pretty good start. They laughed. I laughed. We all laughed like wild-eyed boys who measured themselves by torn jeans and single parents and curse words and laughter, but never by color. Maybe hope was closer than I thought. Thank you. For those of you students in the room who are pontificating, thinking about the idea of becoming a teacher, I have to tell you, before I published my first book, the best 7 years of my life, I was a public high school English teacher for the best 7 years of my life. There's not a day that goes by that I don't miss my job. Yes, for those of you who are thinking about it, yes, do that. We need more good teachers out there in the world. I used to challenge my students on the first day of class when they walked in with a homework assignment. I know what you're thinking, Joaquin, homework on the first day for your new 11th and 9th grade students? Oh, hell yes. I am old school. They are new school. I am Converse. They are Nike. It's my way or North Central Expressway, baby. Yes, homework on the first day. And when they walked in, it was written in bold, all capital letters on the chalkboard. Yeah, chalk. I was the last teacher to come around to the smart board. I kept pushing it off a year and pushing it off because I like chalk. I like the physicality of the chalk in my hand and how it made me feel, and I like the smell of it, and I like making my asthmatic kids in the front row cough. But, it was. Yeah, so written in chalk was this homework. It said homework, : and then it said, write a poem that will change the world. And the homework was actually due in 187 days. They turned it in on the last day of class. It counted as part of this big project in which they had to write 3 original poems that were inspired by 3 poems from the American canon. They had to write an essay on the 3 poems that they found that inspired them, write an essay in which they critiqued their own 3 poems. They had to perform one of them after school to me one-on-one and one of them to the entire class. So this was a big deal. And when I would say this to them on the first day of school, don't worry. We got 187 days to do it. And I'm good. I'll get you there, 1 year, this one kid, Marco. The troublemakers are almost always named Mark. Juan Carlos and Marco. He raised his hand. And this is what he said to me on that first day of school, right after I described the assignment. He said to me, where's your poem that will change the world? And I remember at that exact moment, the thought that was running through my head was, damn! Because unfortunately, I didn't feel like I had written it yet. Flash forward a few months, we're in class, that same class, and we're doing this thing that I used to do called Dear and D. That's where you drop everything and read and discuss. And I love newspapers. I know it's a dying media, I know, but I love them. I love the way they feel in my hands. I like the way they smell. I like everything about newspapers. And I come from a place called Dallas, which has a great newspaper in our city. And plus I know I got a cousin who can get me as many as I want for free. Don't steal newspapers, people. Don't do that. We would use newspapers. And we were doing this in-circle discussion where we all read the same article in the newspaper. And then the students on the outer circle got to ask students on the inner circle questions about what we had all just read. We were reading an article together about how Darfur parallels Rwanda, a dozen or so years ago, still does to this day. And this kid Marco, who was in the inner circle, when asked about it, raised his hand and he said this very brutal but honest thing. And what he said just sort of destroyed me for the rest of the day. Now I went home and I couldn't think, I couldn't grade, I couldn't read, I couldn't cook for my family. I just kind of just sat there all night, just sort of numb from what he said. And around midnight, I'm sitting in the living room by myself. My wife and my daughters are long since asleep, still thinking about what this kid said in class. And around midnight, right when the clock turned, the hour turned, I sort of did something I don't do a lot. I turned on the television. And when I turned on the television, whoever was the last person watching, I think it was my youngest daughter, it was on this channel that's like this channel that's like 24 hours of animals, this animal channel. And there was a documentary that was just starting about the African elephant. And I watched it. I watched an entire 1-hour documentary about the African elephant from beginning to end. And then I turned it off. And then I went into my office. And I wrote for about 6 hours. And then I went to school the next day with no sleep. And I used to have a lot of hair back in the day. So when I got to school that day, my hair was just sort of all over the place and had that crust, the eye crust in all. And I walked into my ninth graders in the morning, that morning at like 8 a.m. And one of my ninth graders, Tori, she looked at me and she's like, ew, you look ugly. And I said, I know, it's Marco's fault, but I have it. She's like, what? This is it. This is the poem that will change the world. So I'm hoping this is it. I'm hoping this is the poem that will change the world, at least, a couple of hundred university students and faculty members at a time anyway. So this is called Elephant. Sometime in April in 1994, armed Hutu soldiers entered a small school in Rwanda and opened fire on a classroom full of children. One of the survivors later testified that her best friend's last words were, "Please don't kill me. I'll stop being Tutsi." Somewhere in Africa, an elephant will stand at the foot of a lifeless calf for 6 days before being forcibly pulled away by the herd. Exactly 1 year later to the day, that same elephant will return to stand and mourn at decaying bones for another 3 days before once again being forcibly pulled away. This is more than metaphor. It happened. And I know nothing of what it is to lose a child. I know the image of this elephant and her lifeless calf happened on the other side of the world from me, but I know somehow I am connected to this. It was not long ago that the bodies of mothers and children fell from a waterfall in Rwanda by the thousands. How their arms and legs would fling about wildly as though raging against gravity. If you travel there today, you can visit a small school where the bones of 100 children slaughtered by Hutu soldiers still cower in each other's arms, the gray tattered garments giving way to the white beneath, not the skeleton, but the soul without blemish. And I am reminded of the young student who raised his hand in my classroom and said, "What do I care about Africa? We got our own problems here." And to you, young man, I say there is nothing more deserving on this planet of your pledge of allegiance than that of a dying child with outstretched arms. You see, in my country, starving refugee children vied with monster truck racing for America's attention. And if I hear another one of those self-serving, first-person perspective poems, I swear to you, the next time I touch a stage, I'm going to scream, "Wake up. Wake up. Wake up for 3 minutes and 10 seconds, because no poet is greater than his best poem. And no individual is more important than the collective we that is mankind. When will we as a people realize that while we get lost in the drama of the new season of Survivor, 2,000 children die a day from AIDS in Africa? When will we as a people be at the end of our sit down and be quiet? When will we as a people finally stand up and be heard? And the 87 cents a day that I pledge to save one child's life just does not feel like enough. So tonight, I want to say something overtly poetic for the children of Africa. Something like, in Africa, they plant children in the ground and grow angels. This is more than metaphor. It happens. And somewhere in Africa, a mother will stand at the foot of a small white coffin for days before being forcibly pulled away by her people. Thank you. Part of this week is about the underrepresented youth experience. And I've got a new book called Family Tree that I have with me. And I want to read a couple from the new book. And the couple that I'm going to share are sort of about my youth and where I came from as someone from the inner city who was raised in terms of socioeconomic structure very poor, but was wealthy in many other things. The best 7 years of my life were those years when I was a high school English teacher. But I've been my father's son my whole life, you know? So I wrote this poem as a combination of both those experiences. This is called Final Exam for My Father. One, true or false? The night you walked out on me and my mother, you hesitated before grabbing the doorknob. Two, if a bus leaves the city at 60 miles per hour to nowhere in particular, and a man on that bus has left his only son behind in the darkness of that city, how many miles will it take before that son forgets what his father's hands look and feel like? Three, on the night that you left us, how many hearts did you break? A, one, mine. B, one, my mother's. C, two, mine and my mother's. D, three, mine, my mother's, and yours. Four, true or false? In certain species of the animal kingdom, when a male member of that species abandons his offspring, that male member of that species is ostracized, beaten, and in some instances, killed. Five, in the space provided, define the terms further, farther, and father. Six, on the night that your father died, what, if anything, did you have to say to God? Seven, when we survived 9 days in a row before the welfare check came in on a bag of maize and a crock pot full of wishes that tasted just like frijoles, did you feel the fire on your fingertips every time my mother winced as she turned the tortilla on the open flame? Eight, because of your blood, I have spent every year of my life enveloped by skin that's too light to be brown and too dark to be white. I used to hate this about myself, but I finally come to love this about myself. What do you love and hate about yourself? Nine, as a young man, you A, never loved a young, beautiful, dark brown woman. B, loved one young, beautiful, dark brown woman. C, loved many young, beautiful, dark brown women. D, loved only the idea of young, beautiful, dark brown women. 10, list 5 things you're truly grateful for and 5 things you're truly regretful for. 11, a famous American poet's mother once said, single mothers are almost always better men than men are. What do you make of this, Father? 12, without using the words I'm or sorry, in the space provided, write an apology letter to my mother. 13, on a scale from 1 to 10, with 1 being not difficult and 10 being quite difficult, how challenging do you think it is for a widow to grow up in the barrio of the Lower East Side? 14, as a child, your son remembers hearing in hushed voices whispered by his drunk uncles that more than likely you are not that child's father. What, if anything, do you have to say to them? 15, finish this sentence. My son, if I only had one thing to say to you, it would be, and one final question to conclude the test. Father, would it mend or break your heart if I told you I forgive you. I'm going to read one more from the new book, and then I'm going to close out with one after that. So I've got two more in me. If you've got two more in to stay, I would love for you to hear these last two. The title of the book is called Family Tree, and this is the title poem from the new book, and it's for my mother and my father. It goes like this. They say fruit don't fall far from the family tree, and I hope that's not true. Used to think my mother was a willow and my father was an oak. But the tree I fell from is crooked and broke, split in two by lightning. That's why there's nothing more frightening than the sound of my raised voice in the direction of my youngest daughter. You see, I don't ever want to look at me the way I imagine I look at my father, right as I stare him in the face and ask him, how could you leave me in a place where oak trees are as scarce as two-parent families? Where the first word a hungry child learns is please. Ain't no shade under a family tree when a father leaves. Just boughs as broke as the vows he spoke the night he plucked me into existence. They say a tree can only withstand so much resistance. I wonder, if you cut my heart in two and counted the rings from the center to its edge, would it equal the number of years it's been since you left? You were the taking tree. Took everything you could from her. Took everything you could from me. Left my mother's arms looking for your limbs and grasping only air. That's why she didn't mind ensnaring men who only pretended to care. Somewhere between the muck and mire of a brown girl's fear and a white boy's desire is where my roots took hold. I was less than a year old. Nothing more than a sapling when you left me under the shade of the woman my mother used to be. Don't you see, Father? This is the story of a boy, a dull axe, and a tree. It's taken me years to cut you out of me. Can you imagine the cacophony? The sound of the blades striking against you? The sound of a family being split in two, and now that I'm through, I find I'm just as stumped as you, wondering what to do with the remnants of you. Maybe carve one of your limbs into a cane. No, I could never lean on you. Maybe sculpt you into a blood-red violin. No, I wouldn't know to begin to find the music in any of this, so I'll carve a coffin from your carcass, give your absence some purpose, and I'll fill it with poems. Most of them true and a few of them lies. I could write about your hands and her eyes. Some will be hellos, but most will be goodbyes. And then I'll load you up, cart you far away from me, give you a proper burial at sea, and though my muscles may ache from all that weight, I'll walk you out beyond the break and let the tide take you away from me. Maybe then we'll both be free. Maybe then the world can see that I am the fruit and you are the tree. I fell from you and you failed me. I am the waves and she is the sea. I break away and she breaks me. I am not you, though you are me. I am the fruit that fell far from the tree. Thank you. I've got one last one. We're going to do a Q&A after this. So those of you who want to hang for a Q&A, we'll do it, and you can come close and ask questions, and I'll sit, and it's going to be awesome. But I've got one last one for those of you who have to take off for lunch or for a class or something. And I love sort of closing with this one, sort of my favorite one. And you talk about sort of an underrepresented youth in this poem. I used to be a firm believer that Spanish was the most beautiful language on the planet. Partly because the words have sexes, like some are feminine and some are masculine. And if you go to some parts of the world, and particularly like Mexico City, oh my goodness, if you ever find yourself in Mexico City, the Spanish that's spoken there, when people speak, it's like they're singing to you. It's so beautiful, it's so elegant, so lovely. But then this kid walked into my class one year when I was, I think, my 5th year of teaching. This 16-year-old kid walked into my class. And you never know, when they're going to teach you. And that was the case. And this kid walks in and teaches me, that Spanish is not actually the most beautiful language on the planet, that there is another. And I was so mystified by this kid's writing and the way this kid lived his life that at the end of that, very near the end of that 187 days that we had together, I grabbed him by the shoulders and I said, John, I've written this poem about you. Help me with it, help me translate it so We did, and so I wrote this for him. And this is the last one. And I want to thank you for having me, and I hope you hang out today, because I'm going to hang until they kick me out to answer questions and talk with you guys. Oh, and by the way, I brought books with me. I'm a writer, so I carry a suitcase full of books and CDs, and my favorite way to celebrate any week, whether it's a welcome week or a celebration of culture week like we're in here, my favorite way to celebrate is to buy a book from a poet. So, yeah, so. And I know you're college students. Some of you are like, Joaquin, come on. I don't have any cash on me. Don't worry, there's an app for that. We can. So this is the last one. Thank you so much, you for having me. It's called Poem for John. So the assignment I gave my high school English students was to write a series of 4 short haiku poems that distinctly say something about themselves and then recite them to the class. These are the 4 poems that John recited that day. Speaking in a quiet, communicative way always came easy to me. Accident is equal to invention, but there is hope. I still practice accidents. I restore antique radios. I like the way static feels in my palms. You cannot deny the lucid fact that silence must succumb to voice. And I have to let you know now, John. Although you never uttered one word in class, you spoke volumes to me. And you taught me a lesson in humility. Because I realized that day in my blind and deaf arrogance that I asked you to master my language without attempting to learn one word of yours. So starting today, I'll begin by learning the signs for what I feel are the most beautiful spoken words in existence. Words like moon, eclipse, grandfather, sunflower. And I realize now, John, if I were ever to write you a poem, it would probably sound something like this to you. Mother was the moon, and father was the sun. The moon and sun that existed in a constant state of eclipse. So I learned to grow despite the darkness. And I learned at an early age the power of spoken word. My mother's silence and my father's absence formed cave walls that my grandfather's words reverberated off of, like children dancing in a field of purple simply for the sake of purple. And it is true. Metaphorically speaking, I am that sunflower growing wildly in the alley adjacent to nothing. And though my petals extend upwards toward darkness, my roots extend deeply toward the warmth of all the voices that nourished me or didn't nourish me. So thank you, mute mother. Thank you, absent father. Thank you, beautiful, all-encompassing grandfather. And thank you, John, my silent, poetic student. For your words. Thank you so much. Wonderful day today. Good job. We did good. Thank you. Thank you. So if we have any questions? Yeah, there we go. Thank you. And I'll answer anything. I used to tell my students, like, I'm not going to, lie to you unless it's to inspire you, So, I'll answer as honestly and as truthfully as I can. So please, anything, whether it's about writing or about what it is to be a mestizo growing up in East Dallas. whether it's what you should be reading, I'll gladly tell you that too. I just did a lecture at a literary festival with Marcus Zusak. Do you guys know who that is? Marcus Zusak? He and I were the 2 keynote writers. Homework. Read every word that Marcus Zusak has ever written. That's your homework. He wrote a fantastic book called The Book Thief. It was just made into a movie a while back. But before you read The Book Thief, read his second novel, I Am the Messenger. Oh my goodness, man, that book will shake you. It'll throw you for a loop. We were at a Q&A. Marcus and I were sitting next to each other, and someone said, for you, Joaquin the poet, and for you, Marcus the novelist, can anyone do what you do? Can anyone be a novelist, and can anyone be a poet? And he and I just instantly leaned into the mic at the exact same time and said, yes, no. Like, I said yes, and he said no, like right there, you know? It's like, yes, you can. He was like, no, not everyone, no. So it's good news. I've got good news for you, you know? You might not be a novelist, but you can be a poet. I'm telling you, everyone can be a poet. Do we have any questions? We have a mic that's floating around the room if you want to speak into it. Otherwise, you have to enunciate from the back row so we all can hear you. Anyone at all? Yes.
You're a very dramatic poet.
Yes.
Are you equally dramatic in your classroom?
You're a very dramatic poet. Were you equally dramatic in your classroom? How did you sustain that? Could you sustain it? And could your students sustain that? Wonderful, wonderful question. I remember the first time I walked into a poetry slam competition. I'm going to stand. I feel like some of you guys can't see me. I walked into a poetry slam competition, which I didn't know what it was when I walked into it. My students challenged me because I kept bringing my poems into my students and using them as warm-ups. And they're like, man, that's good. Who wrote that? And I was like, I did. Thank you. You know? And so they challenged me to go out and perform them for audiences. So when I found Dallas Poetry Slam I put an open mic, and it sent me to this thing called the Dallas Slam. And when I walked in, it was like a battle. It was like 2 poets on the stage facing each other. How crazy. And, you know, performing their poem at the audience and at the other poet. And then these random judges who were picked from the bar, these 5 drunk people, gave you scores. You know, so stupid, you know? Oh, the poem about your dead grandfather, 4.2. I really wasn't feeling it. You know, it's like, it's the most ridiculous thing in the world. But it's supposed to be ridiculous because it's just a trick to fool people into thinking it's a game show when it's really just us sharing poems and tricking you into listening to us for an hour. So when I walked in, I thought it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen because these guys look like rock stars. You know, like picture the movie 8 Mile, but not as cool. The nerdier version of that was us. And so I chickened out my first time. I scratched my name off the sign-in list, and I went back the next week, and I chickened out again. And the host of our show, my very good friend, a poet named Rock Baby is his poet name. He said to me the second week, he's like, Joaquin, I saw you here last week. You had poems, and you didn't compete. Why not? And I was like, he's like, I saw your name on the list tonight, and you scratched out. You're not competing. Why? And I said, well, I'm a teacher, so my voice is real scratchy today. I'm a teacher. Totally lying. And he was like, okay, So this is how Rock started the show that night. He said, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage the first competing poet in the slam night, my homeboy from 7 days ago, Joaquin. Come on up to the stage, Joaquin, you're first. So I that was my entry into poetry slam. So that night I battled a poet, and I won that battle, and then I had to battle another poet, and I won that battle, and then I had to battle a third poet. And I was lucky enough to beat her, and at the end of the night, I won my first poetry slam. And when I was walking out the door, Rock grabbed me, my host, and he's like, Joaquin, you won first place, here's your money. I was like, what? You can get paid for poetry? And he handed me $50 cash. And I was like, what? Do you know how many lunches I can buy as a teacher for $50? So I went back, I was hooked. And I went back the next Friday, and I was lucky enough to win again. And I went back to Friday, I won. The first 7 that I entered, I won. And after about 7 weeks, my friend Rock said to me, he said, you know, Joaquin, you're good at this. And I said, thank you. And he said, how'd you get so good? Like, do you have theater training or something? And I said to him, I'm a high school English teacher. I sail the Odyssey at 8 a.m. to 9th graders who don't want to buy it. I have to be good. I have brought in boom boxes with beats playing behind me and done hip-hop versions of Edgar Allan Poe poems for my students. That has happened in my room. I will do whatever it takes to sell young people on the ideal that writing and reading is thrilling. And yes, That's how I worked. And, you know, that whole, oh, the great thing about being a teacher, you get off during the summer and you have that break. Bullshit. I mean, it is the most draining, when you do it right, I think, when you do it well, it's the most physically and emotionally draining thing one can do. And it is. And at the end of the day, when I didn't stink, when I didn't physically stink of sweat and sneeze residue of young people, I would be pissed off at myself. I would literally be pissed off at myself and go back and look at last year's lessons plans and the year before that to find out what I did wrong. Because I'm supposed to be sweaty. I'm supposed to be stinky. Things are supposed to be in a state of disarray. Work should have been done here. And that's what my life was. And man, those summers, it was all about reworking my lesson plans and looking for new things to, you know, new writers to insert. And it was just, you know, it's a nonstop life. And, you know, but I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I mean, it was like, I was the guy who got to school at 6 a.m. My wife thought I was insane. My class didn't start till 8:30, but I got there at 6. And I stayed till 6 p.m. because I only had to do tutorials 2 days a week, but I did them 5 days a week because why not? You know, I've got a lot of kids. And yeah, hardest 7 years of my life, in terms of work, were those 7 years. But the best, by far, the best, hands down. And I know I'll be back. I know, like this whole publishing and touring, it's going to come crashing down to earth. I'll get writer's block sometime and you know, be done with this. And I know I'll be back. You know, be back in classroom. That was a long answer to a very short question. I'm sorry, but that was a great question. Thank you. Anyone else? Question at all about teaching or writing? Yes, please. Yes.
Sorry.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's called Stand Up and Be Heard. It's sort of a call to arms to young people as I'm questioning myself as to whether I'm a good teacher or not. Yeah. Oh, good night. I'm doing a poem for you guys. What's your first name? Cassie, because you said so, Cassie. I'm going to share a poem with you guys. Goodness sakes, I feel so bad for the sign language interpreters because this one's pretty fast-paced, but I'm going to slow it down a bit. It goes like this. Man, I haven't done it in a while, Cassie. Jeez Louise. If you see me in the middle of this poem do this, I'm not pausing for dramatic effect. That's me thinking to myself, what the hell is the next line? So I'll try it. I'll give it a try. Somewhere near the town square of middle of nowhere America, sitting in a classroom far too small for the poems that have been read in it, I hear the humming of fluorescent light bulbs in my head. And I begin to ask myself the following question. Am I a good teacher? And tragically, the only answer that comes to me is the one that my 9th grade students wielded every day as though it was the hammer of Thor. I don't know. And this will not do. Because I don't want to become one of those teachers who lives his life like that student that's forced to incessantly ride the merry-go-round but who dreams of roller coasters. So after much deliberation, I've come to the conclusion that this is wrong. All of it. And I owe my students more than state-sponsored standardized tests. So starting today, I will embrace this internal strife and hereby dedicate the rest of my life to 3 little words. Reverse the stereotypes. So class, let us begin. Clear your desks and minds of everything, because today we're going to begin with a pledge of allegiance to Trey, who sits in the front of the class every day with the strength to be a high school student in Texas and be openly gay. Yes, today we pledge allegiance to courage, voice, and free thought. Gone are the days of sit down and be quiet. Today I will instruct my students to stand up and be heard, to question authority, to give up their right to remain silent because anything they say can and will be used against ignorance. Today, we will run with scissors and eat paste. Why? Because you said we can't. And because it tastes good today, I'm emptying out my big old bag of, now students, you know you shouldn't be talking. No! Today there'll be none of that. Because today, half of you will talk excessively. The other half will practice the forgotten art of listening. And there'll be no standing on desktops today because I'm no captain, my captain. But we will carpe diem. And tonight for homework, you will carpe noctem. Because your homework tonight is to go home and write a poem about your mother. A poem crafted with so much passion and life that you feel like that woman who dreams a scalpel but is given a butter knife. So she takes it and carves a new Mount Rushmore with it in honor of Eleanor Roosevelt, Alice Paul, Sojourner Truth, because all due respect to those former presidents are mothers and daughters and women. They've done just as much fighting and breathing and living as any man to make this country what it is today. You will read this to her tonight. You will teach and she will learn. And the only lessons we're going to review tomorrow are the ones that I learned in my grandfather's garden before school was even a thought to me. Like number 1, share. Like number 2, care. Number 3, dare to be the most beautiful thing in life that you can be, young people. Yourself. Number 4, play. Number 5, dream. Number 6, if you're careless and spill something, then get up off your butt and clean it. Number 7, if you make a mistake, you can't just say you're sorry, you have to mean it. Number 8, whatever you do, do well. Number 9, mijo. How many times do I have to tell you? Do not pee in the garden. And number 10, young people, be aware of miracles. They're everywhere. They're all around you. Even in places you'd never expect to find them. Places just like you. In class, one last lesson before we're through. Always remember, life is going to have its ups and downs. But that's okay. Because roller coasters, hell, they're much more fun than merry-go-rounds. I know this to be true because you taught me this. Now there's a poem out there waiting for you. It's called Life. Go find it because class is dismissed. Thank you, Cassie. This is a fantastic day. Thank you so much for a wonderful day. We have time for one last question before I head over to the table. Yes?
I have one.
Please.
In one of your poems, you said that your skin was not light enough to be white or dark enough to be brown. What made you feel that way?
My father left the year that I was born. And what I know about him, I know from stories from my tios, my uncles, and the occasional story my mom would tell me. She didn't like to talk about him much. And my mother, but I know that he was a white man. And I know that he had blonde hair and blue eyes. And my mother she looks like an Aztec princess. She's like the darkest brown woman with these cheekbones that are like 2 moons orbiting a planet, and this hair that's just exquisite, jet black hair. And I'm sort of in between both those worlds. And I'll share something I wrote with you on the plane, on the way over here. I wrote this. It's called the naming ceremony. Because I've been told by my uncles that, and my mother, that my grandfather and my father battled each other over the naming ceremony for me, which I'm sure is like a beautiful lie. But I mean, it's a beautiful one, though, you know. So I wrote this. My mother told me once that my father and grandfather battled over my naming ceremony, which is likely a lie, but a beautiful one nonetheless. So I choose not to protest. My grandfather wanted to name me Joaquin or Miguel. My father wanted to name me Royce or Del. So I have one of each. My first name is browner than my grandfather's eyes. My middle name is whiter than my father's lies. I spy with my little eye something brown and white. When asked, what is your name? I only reply one thing. My name is Joaquin, but actually I have 2 names. Does that omission make me a liar? A half-breed archetype? Am I 2 halves of the same whole, or a player in the oldest story ever told? The child must destroy the father, but why bother? Now that I'm a father, with 2 beautiful daughters who have brown names followed by browner names. So I will tell you as I told them. I come from brown and white. I come from left and right. My grandfather was right when he said, Your father blessed you, kid, by leaving you when he did. Now, the reason I wrote that is I sometimes struggle with what it is to be this sort of in-between worlds. You know, my uncles and aunts used to call me, this nickname they had for me was Weddle, which means a lot of things. It means, light-skinned, it means white, it means a lot of different things. And I think they use it as a term of endearment, but it weighed heavy on me as a kid because all of my primos, all of my cousins were these dark, beautiful Latinos, and I was this in-between Latino. And I remember, I remember as a kid saying these words out loud to the universe, saying the words, "I hate my father," out loud to the universe. And I feel so regretful for saying that out loud to the universe because it's taken me a long time to come to terms with the fact that I love my father with everything that I have, and my mother. I love both of them so much. And I realize now that just because both of them turn their backs on me doesn't mean that I have to do the same thing to them. And I realize now that it's because of my father's absence and my mother's silence that my grandfather stepped forward. So maybe that absence and that silence weren't a curse, but rather a blessing, So thank you for that question. You, thank you so much. Oh, wait, we have one last one, and then I'm going to go over to the table. Yes. Thank you. Wonderful question. The one about elephant is actually in a book that I don't have with me. It's in my second book, of Fire and Rain, and if you come and accost me, I'll get you the website where you can order it. And the latest one, the last one, the request one is it's on CD, spoken word CD. And there's a new project that I'm working on. I'm working on so many things right now, but there's a new project I'm working on. It's sort of a first year teacher's Bible of sorts. And it's sort of a collection of stories and poems and lesson plans that I think work really, really well for English and history teachers. So it's going to be in that thing, which is eventually going to be called, I think, Stand Up and Be Heard, a first year's teacher survival guide, something like that. But so soon, that one will be ready soon. Thank you all so much for a fantastic day. I'm going to go sit over there. I hope you come talk to me.